Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Hello.
Am I echoing?
No, I can't hear an echo.
Okay, thank you. Joe, thank you for coming back and joining me. I'm glad to have you here. I just saw the notice pop. So, and okay, so we've got some people in the chat. This is a just to say welcome to everybody to a laugh and learn about grief and mourning. And this lovely person next to me, last time she was here, it was as Behind the Veil. However, the power of purpose has given you a new channel name and a new website, which are all linked below, including the last time we were chatting. So, I just, I told you this backstage, but I really enjoy your videos. They're on point. They are articulate, concise, and if I can't spend 6 minutes of time watching one of your videos, then, just to help myself, then maybe I need to do some things differently. So Sadhana is here. Hello, Sadhana. She was here stopping in and saying, fascinating, this is your topic today. I will be sure to watch the replay or catch. I'm starting a month-long session with a client today on the same topic. Very, very important. I think that person is lucky to have you work with them, Sadhana. Jamie, Wandering Mountain Bardic Path, is here. Looking forward to hearing the discussion. Not sure how much I will participate in the chat, only because of work. I get that. Or she is here. Can't watch. But you could talk about how to help and support someone who's grieving. Yes.
Cheryl's got you covered, all she.
We've got you covered. And we're even going to talk about things not to say to somebody who's grieving. So, Jane the Seeker is here. Jane, hello. Glad to see you. And by the way, I am with Jane the Seeker tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. It's Tuesdays with Tarot Stash, Joe. I didn't know if, Jane has an exclusive for Tuesdays with Tarot
Stash. You've got your own day.
Yes, I have my own day. So, and okay, so going on and catching up with the chat, lovely people here. Deanne, Blue Crescent Tarot, hello.
Hi, Deanne.
Selkie is here, hello. Notification pop, thank you. Patrice is here, hello, Patrice.
Hi, Patrice.
Marge L, hello. And by the way, I'm going to keep looking over my glasses because, yeah, I that's just the way it is. Jennifer Ball's Witch House is here. Hey, Jenna. You had me at Grief and Mourning. Yeah. So going through, lots to say. So Marge L said, today is the 23rd anniversary of my mom's passing. And Marge L, I would hope that you are doing something to support yourself and to honor your mother and her memories for today. Personally, I know for me, when my parents, their birthdays or anniversaries come up, that's something that I like to do, think about them. Oh, yeah, there you go. Patrice is right. Joe has come out from behind the veil.
Very clever, yeah.
Patrice has brought it.
There you go. That's my fan.
Yes. Aspasia Rising is here. Hello.
Hi, Beth.
And okay, so lots of wonderful people. So I have missed a bunch of people. Richie is here.
Hi, Richie.
Oh, Deanne says, I have you on mute, but your faces are beautiful. I will be listening soon. So, oh, yeah. Jane says we have an NDA, non-disclosure, something or other. Hi, Kristen Louise.
Hi, Kristen.
And okay, I'm probably missing people. Sherry Kirk is here. Hello, Sherry. Glad to have you here.
Hi, Sherry.
And Jane said my dad passed in 2008. My mom is 88 now. Yep. Wow. So, okay. So I'm going to do my best at, we probably have enough information for 2.5 days worth of content. I mean,
24-hour stream, Gerald.
24. Oh my gosh.
Do it.
Oh my gosh. Hi, Lori Tries Life. Glad to have you here. Thank you. And Sherry said, in the process of loss of my husband of 48 years. Oh,
sorry to hear that, Sherry.
I'm very sorry to hear that. It's so challenging. So if I don't focus on chat for a little bit, please understand I want to share as much information as I can. I'm highlighting this because Nancy has asked, interested to hear how there are connections between tarot and dealing with grief. So we can chat a little bit about that. I have that highlighted. Okay. So yeah, lots of, yeah, this is an intense time of the year for a lot of people. Anytime, Joe, I think you would probably agree, anytime, well, I'm going to speak from my own experience. Birthdays, anniversaries, and special events, when those come up, those are always challenging times. So,
yeah,
especially when grieving.
Yeah, for me, like from my experiences, it's never really the anniversary of the death. Sometimes that passes by and I don't even think about it. But there are times like, so my dad, he passed away when I was 13. So Father's Days, I don't really like seeing all the Father's Day cards. Christmas, I don't like Christmas. I never liked Christmas after my dad passed. So yeah, there's different times of year, and even as we kind of move towards autumn and the nights start drawing in, there's something about that time. I know it's kind of that kind of thinning of the veil, isn't it? And I've always started to think more about people who've passed at that time. So it's like we've said backstage, and it's very individual grief, isn't it?
Yes, very, very much. And in the description below are Joe ways to find Joe. There's the YouTube, and here's the new website. Brand spanking new, people. Go sign up for the newsletter. So, and okay, gonna pop over to chat for the last time. Not sure why it. Okay, anniversary. Don't worry about the chat. Thank you. You know, I will watch for any trouble. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So what is grief? And put in its simplest terms, grief is an intense emotional experience triggered by a loss. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so when we think about this, grief is the internal meaning given to the experience of loss. Mourning is when you take the grief you have on the inside and express it outside of yourself. So any thoughts on those two things, Joe?
I think I was just thinking about my own experience or observing people around me, because we were talking backstage, weren't we, about how we grieve in Western cultures. It can be very different to other cultures. My own experience of observing people around me with grief was that mourning was done behind closed doors. And I think maybe that's influenced me over the years. I'm not someone who's very good at expressing my emotions to people. I prefer to, if I am grieving or anything else, I tend to kind of do it on my own. I process it myself.
Yes.
So yeah, more because we were saying as well, weren't we? Sometimes back in however time, Victorian times, wasn't it? People would wear black for a certain period of time to show it. Whereas I think now it's not always so obvious, is it, that someone is mourning?
No, we don't have any visual indication that somebody is going through a loss. I know in war times there were flags in the windows for the number of children that were in service, and then there were black bands placed around those when one of those children were killed in combat, and people would wear armbands. So there was indication. We don't have a lot of that now. We don't have a lot of that. So you just can't look at somebody who is sad and try to cheer them up and understand that they're dealing with grief. So I want to point out, Sherry, it has been 2 years. My husband passed, and I still cry every day. I'm sorry that you're dealing with that. I'm glad you're letting yourself cry. I mean, bottling it up is so so challenging, and we don't want to have that happen. And I don't think there are enough public family rituals surrounding grief in the Western world. They've gone to the wayside. Yeah, I mean, and as a culture, children don't see, as Joe, you had indicated, it's a very private experience, and we don't actually have. We can't necessarily see how we process grief by our parents, because it's children learn from the adults around them. So,
yeah.
So let me ask this question, and this what do we grieve? Joe, what do we grieve?
It can be all sorts of things, can't it? Not just a bereavement. It could be loss of a job, loss of a home. It could be even positive things, which sounds weird, but if you move home, there might be some sadness, even though you're kind of maybe looking forward to going to a new place, but you could be sad. Getting married may bring out some feelings of loss, maybe because you're leaving behind one life and going into another. Pets, grieve pets. I still think there's a lot of stigma around grieving pets, which is, I think if you don't have a pet, I think it's really hard to understand it, but it can be, I've experienced it, it's very painful.
Yes. Yeah.
Have I missed any? Have you got any, Gerald?
Well, I think you, it's anything that is a loss for us that we experience it, and others do not need to understand it. And it's just, and I'll be honest with you, sometimes I have been surprised by the big things that I have lost that I didn't have that much grief over, and the smaller things that I did. It's like my first pet, my first cat as an adult, when I got her, and when she died, I was it hit me really harder than I had expected, and so I had to turn the gentleness on me, and people don't understand that. People are like, I actually had somebody say to me, "It was just a cat."
Oh no.
Hashtag what not to say to somebody grieving. I mean, and at that point, I sort of looked at that person, and I didn't sort of. I looked at that person and said, "But she was my cat."
Yeah.
And then I stepped away.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like,
I remember I worked with, I won't give details to break confidence, but I worked with somebody, and the subject we were working on was totally not related to this, but one day they said, oh, my pet has passed away. It's a dog. And the person didn't feel they could talk about it, said, let's talk about it. Because, and maybe because I know how painful it is, maybe, I don't know if that, maybe that helped, but they really appreciated being able to just put aside what we were dealing with, what we were meant to be dealing with. Because I just think, well, if something is at the forefront of your mind, let's talk about that, because you're not going to focus on what we came here to do.
Yes.
And I think people are, I think because of the stigma, I think sometimes people are embarrassed to talk about their grief when it comes to pets. Because they think,
yeah. And even the idea of, I mean, first of all, I think that, okay, we're not going to talk about why we were here or what we're here to talk about. We're going to talk about what's going on in the moment, and that's really very important. When I used to do meetings and trainings, we would call that coming into the room. What's been going on for people? Because the time spent allowing people to share and to be present and to be in the moment ended up being time well spent, because everybody then was aware of what was going on for everyone else. And then it built the relationship with everybody else in the room by being okay with that. So, and I also think we grieve. It's like when our, I know when my father went into hospice, that was definitely a grieving, because who my father was no longer.
Yeah.
He had already changed. So we grieve the loss of who we know as our parents, how we knew them, and what the relationship was. So so,
and maybe also we grieve for, I think there's times where I've grieved for parts of my life that I wanted to have been different, but they weren't. So I think there's a process of that as well, being able to grieve that and come to an acceptance that it will never be how I wanted it to be. And I think that's really, I think for me anyway, that was really important for me to move on from that.
Yes. So some general things about grief, and I have 3 things up, well, actually 4 things, and we'll pop these up. Everyone grieves differently. And I don't think there's not a right way or a wrong way. It just is your way. Grief is messy. It's so complex. So, and sometimes we think we are doing well, when in fact, then we find a note, or we see a letter or a picture. You know, Facebook every once in a while will tell you, here's a memory, and well, God freaking damn it, I didn't want to see that memory today. Thank you. So, but hi Terry Lee, good to see you. I'm just glancing at chat, trying to get caught up. Sometimes I grieve for the world and all the pain of people, Mother Earth and the damage. Cry for her, for the world. Yes. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to pay attention to chat very well, and that's okay. So, anything you want to add about this idea of everyone grieving differently?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I've seen, I don't know whether it's on social media, or there's times where I've seen people judging other people because they don't appear to be grieving in the way that they should be. So if someone isn't outwardly emotional, people question, well, why aren't they crying, or why aren't they, or they don't look like they grieve, they don't look sad. Whereas actually maybe they're not people who outwardly express it, they don't feel comfortable. Or the opposite, maybe some people are very expressive and they get judged for being overly. I mean, you can't win, can you? So I think I think it depends. Maybe it depends on the person's own view of how you should grieve, and
Mm-hmm.
how they perceive others. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And grief is not linear. What does that mean, Joe? I'm putting Joe on the spot, by the way,
Yeah.
because it's my channel and there has to be some laughter there. So there you go.
Yeah, it doesn't, I guess you don't just start from a point of huge amounts of grief and then it just gets better and better and better. I don't think. You kind of go up and down. You'll have some good days, some bad days. And even, my father died 29 years ago this year, and there are still things that really upset me about him not being around, like the key points he's missed in my life. And I don't feel bad about that. I think that's normal. So my grief, it's not as painful. Well, it was weird. I suppose for me as a child, it was really hard to get my head round. So I think it was later on in life, maybe in my 20s, where the pain really came out. And I don't think it's
Sure.
as painful now, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still painful.
Yes, it is still painful. Yeah. And
But
Beth,
maybe
it's
sorry.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say with the linear thing, I suppose it's trying not to place your expectations on, if you have a few good days and then you have a bad day, that's okay. That doesn't mean you're kind of, I don't know, moving backwards. It's just the fact that sometimes, like you said, Gerald, something can pop up, a memory or something can come into your mind and it just throws you off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beth said, that is a pet peeve of mine when people judge others because they're not grieving properly. Please. And define properly. That doesn't make much sense to me. And I think, this is grief. It's circular, it's linear, it's one of the complex things that we have as human beings. And my opinion, for entertainment purposes only, it's when I do not recognize that I am in grief and I'm not seeing that is when there are problems created. Because if I don't take the time to go, oh, this is part of the grieving process. Now, granted, that may be 2 weeks later, but it is definitely part of the process.
I read somewhere the other day, not a book about grief, funny enough, but it was, I don't know if there's links between grief and physical pain in terms of how we process it. And it can feel really physically painful.
Yes.
Can't it?
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I agree with you. Grieving and mourning does not follow a schedule. And I don't know what else to say.
Did you ever used to hear, though, when I was younger, I used to hear a lot of people say, before I got into sort of working as a therapist, I used to hear a lot of people say, well, 2 years and then you should be, 2 years is the kind of the time it takes to grieve and to move on. And I'm like, where did that, I don't know where that came from, but it seemed to be a really popular thing I would hear a lot.
Yeah.
I don't hear it much now, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I remember hearing that, like, when I broke up with my first long-term relationship, it was 14 years. Someone said, it's a month for every year that you were together. And I went, why? I mean, okay, so yes, and I think in many other cultures, we do need to put a time frame on it, and we do need to, I think it's important to pay attention to time, because in the midst of grieving, we lose the sense of everything, or I do.
Yeah.
It's really, really crazy. Fran Marley is here. Kala Lizzie, hello. Tammy Jackson said, I believe when you awaken, you don't grieve as hard. Once you realize that they are always with you, it is slightly easier. Not saying you don't grieve, but it is not as bad. Having an awareness to different beliefs, and if there is an afterlife, or that they are you're deceased, loved ones are around you can absolutely be helpful. Absolutely. So, and okay, there's absolutely a link. Many books written on that. Dr. Timothy McCraft and Dr. John, so whatever, both have done a lot of research in that.
Ah, okay.
So, and
I find just a personal experience when my nan passed away and when my cat passed away. I know it's two very different things, but when they passed away, it was as though I was living underwater because everything around me was muffled sounds. It felt like I was there, but no, it was a very odd feeling. I felt cold. I felt physically cold, but it's just it, and it. I just remember feeling like this is such a really physical reaction as well. But it wasn't nice, but yeah, it was weird how it happened with both.
yeah. Here's an example of what not to say to someone grieving. You should be over it already. No. You know, and Calla Lizzie's like, that person is just an asshole. So, and gosh, that's awful. Here, a friend of mine, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a hospice worker. She is a Reiki master. She teaches meditation. And one of the things she said, and I wrote it down, is that grief is completely universal and completely unique. I think that's very, very powerful. Very powerful. So, yeah, it's like moving through molasses sometimes. So, and Sherry Kirk said, yes, I have friends that say I should get on with my life. That really hurts. What if your heart can't move on? Well, then these are people who don't really understand and are not knowing how to support you. I mean, I'm sorry, it's pretty awful. So I don't think there's anything getting over. I don't think there's is getting over anything, especially with death. You never get over it. You find ways to move forward the best you can. That is well said, Jamie. Thank you. Very well said. So
I spoke with someone recently who'd had that said to them. And I mean, this isn't my professional opinion. I don't know if there is a professional opinion on it, but my personal opinion is I don't think you can get over a loss. But like Jamie has said, you kind of find you adjust, your life adjusts around the loss, and you move forward without that person, I guess, or you make the choice to. But how can you can't replace that person with anything.
No. And I would be concerned if you try to replace that person with something or someone. And granted, there are times in my own personal experience of loss where I may have done a little more shopping than what I would normally have done. But you're right. It's trying to get there. So, okay. So there's a lot of really wonderful, or a lot of comments in here. So, still having a terrible time. I was my dad caregiver for 30 years. I don't know how to do anything else. I feel lost. Of course you feel lost. And it is one of those things that, and this, this is one of those things that the need to get some help from somebody who is not your friend, someone who is not your family, getting professional assistance is really beneficial, because somebody who doesn't know you might be able to observe things in a way that you can't, or your friends and family cannot. So, okay. All right. Supporting someone who is grieving is tricky. When to offer active support and when to give them space. It's also important to realize that a person in the midst of grief may not know how to ask for help. Yes, I'm going to star that one for later also. So a lot of the books talk about stages of grieving or stages of grief. Back in the late 60s, there was Kubler-Ross came out with a book called On Death and Dying. And for many people, that has framed our understanding of grief and grieving and dying. And in my research, okay, Joe, you've heard of the book?
Yes.
On Death and Dying. Okay. I'm sure many people in the chat have. What I found out recently is that this was a book that she went and she spoke to people who were actively dying and identified the stages that they went through. She did not talk to the survivors. And so those 5 stages of grieving are when somebody who is actively dying goes through, it's like, oh, this is somebody who's actively doing it, not those of us who remain. But many of us can benefit from that. And that being said, there are a lot of different views on the stages of grieving. You had a book or two that you were talking about, Joe?
Yeah, there was just this. I mean, it's a book for more for sort of therapists, and the author talks about different models of grief, like Kubler-Ross. But there's another one she talks about, which I found interesting, which I won't bother with the technical names, but basically it says people move between, this is what they propose, they move between focusing on the loss, which you would expect. So maybe almost avoiding sort of not moving on, but doing the day-to-day stuff, maybe because that feels too painful. Grieving, they talk about breaking bonds with the deceased, so maybe kind of that coming to an acceptance. But then you move from that to what they call restoration, which is getting more back into the day-to-day, not focusing so much on the grief. And I think it's that moving between rather than staying in either one of those places for too long, which may not be healthy because we need to grieve. But I guess I suppose it's sort of having a balance between grieving and not letting it keep you stuck, because I suppose that, you know, whilst it is painful to admit it, but life carries on, doesn't it? The world does not stop, which is, we feel it has for us. But I suppose they talk about being able to move between those, so you're not kind of just grieving all the time, but you are kind of getting back into what's going on around you. And
it's a difficult balance. It's a really challenging balance because and part of that is overall, like, paying attention to what do I need for my well-being, and how do I take care of myself physically while I'm trying to take care of myself emotionally. And gosh, in the healthiest of times, that can be challenging. So, or at least it is for me. So but it's like, oh my gosh. So someone says you start living your life on 2 very different levels. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, so the first stage of grieving that is oftentimes referred to is includes denial, disbelief, shock, or numbness. And that's 4 different things. They do clump together. What do you think about those?
I mean, like I said, I relate to the numbness. That was a very strong physical feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I think with my dad, there was more. I don't think it was denial or just disbelief, because I just couldn't get my head. I knew logically that he was dead, but there was this yearning in me. There was almost like I created these fantasies in my head that him and my mum had just had a row. He'd gone off to go and live somewhere else, and he'd be back, because that was a nice fantasy to live in at that age, to kind of hope. But at the same time, I knew. So it was really, just really weird, kind of moving between those 2 places. But yeah. How about you?
I think numbness is one of those things that really hits me. I get fuzzy. I don't know what I'm doing, where I'm going. Don't ask me to drive somewhere. I mean, because I won't be able to do it. And in particular, you know, it was challenging after my father passed away, because I was developing a nice relationship with him, and I was having the courage to do things that my other brothers had an opportunity to do, share some different experiences. And then after he died, then I didn't have those opportunities. And I was still able to get information about Dad from Mom. But then when Mom died, suddenly I don't have any parents. And it's like, I have to say, just 2 weeks ago, I had picked up my phone to call my mother, and my mother has been deceased for about 10 years. So I was just like, okay, we're not going to do it in that way. There may be some other way to do it, but and it's like, oh, okay. And you know, there's just some times where I go, okay, now Dad would know what to do with this. So, and then I'm like, okay, now I have to figure out a different way to do that. So, and Jane, I have got your question starred to be able to chat with it a little bit. So, I'm just trying to catch up. When my mom died, Jamie said, when my mom died, she was in hospice at a friend's ranch, and I had just gotten there. Unexpectedly, she died the next day. It was crazy, shocking. Yes. And yes. And especially when we have, you know, when losing the parents or grandparents or those, let me rephrase that, losing the people who raised us, that's really, really impactful. So, and so, I mean, it's like, okay. And people have come in. Hi, Puerette, whose name I butcher, my apologies. So I believe there is no such thing as death. We are eternal beings, but it doesn't mean we don't miss them terribly. I talk to my family who have passed all the time. Sometimes they send replies in signs. I think that is wonderful that you have that. And many people don't, or some people, they don't believe it, and it causes extra stress. So, okay. I'm going to take a breath, because there's a lot of emotions, and this is let's honor ourselves for that this is what we're talking about, because we don't. So how you holding up, Joe?
I'm all right. I was just thinking, because there's a few people that have mentioned hospice in the chat. I was just thinking about a friend who passed away. Oh, was it 2 years ago? And I used to work with her, and I'd met up with her for lunch a few years previous, and then I got a message from somebody to say she was in the hospice, and it was, it was time. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. I was like, oh.
Yeah, so I went to see her, knowing it would be the last time I saw her, and I mean, her family were there, and I'd never been to a hospice before to see somebody, and it was actually, I mean, I know this might not be everybody's experience, but it was actually a very peaceful experience. She didn't appear to be in any pain. It felt like this was what was meant to be happening. She was slowly, moving on. And it didn't, I don't know, maybe it was the atmosphere her family had created there. It didn't feel sad. It felt, we were laughing about memories that we shared with her, and it felt, so I think, I don't know, I think sometimes, there is the opportunity to, it's not that death isn't sad, but there's also, like, there's laughter, there's smiles, there's the opportunity for that if we can create it. And it was really nice. I came away sad, but I also came away really grateful that I'd been able to go and also meet some of her family and just say goodbye to her. I think that's really, really special.
That's beautiful. I'm glad you were able to do that. Yes, I think, thank you for the support, everybody, for going through. We all are experiencing a lot of emotion. Sherry, I'm glad you're able to do that. So your eyes are water or tearing because you need them to, and we're okay. Hospice is such a wonderful place because their focus is to make sure the family and the person has what they need. And boy, let me tell you, if you're talking about superheroes, some of these people who work in hospice, they're superheroes. Superheroes. It's really incredible. So second stage of grief is often anger, and anger takes many forms. It can be, and correct me if I'm wrong or jump in, it can be anger at the person, anger at everybody else, anger at yourself. It's just displaced anger about what the hell is going on, and it's messy. It's messy. And and
I don't know. Go on. No, you go ahead. Go on.
Well, I was just saying, and it's one of these times that anger is, I think, and a lot of times where challenges come up between family members, between siblings and relatives, because because anger, it's an emotion. It's a valid emotion. When it goes unchecked, that's when things can get really messy. So I think.
I don't remember feeling anger about, I know I keep going back to my dad, but I think that's the most significant loss I've had. I don't remember feeling anger. I remember feeling like I should be, because I think I'd seen things on TV where people got really angry about someone dying, and I don't think I felt angry at him. I don't know if over the years I internalized that and turned it on myself a bit, because I didn't look after myself very well in my 20s. I don't know. The overriding thing for me was sadness. But yeah, I think you're right. Anger can come up as well.
Yes.
People think they're entitled to certain things after somebody's died. It can get very messy. Sometimes it can move away from actually the person who's died and more about what they've left behind, which is really sad.
Yes. I'll share this. This is maybe too personal. Don't come for me. But when my my first longtime companion, we were no longer together, but when he died, hashtag trigger alert, I had found him dead in his apartment. He'd been dead for a couple of days, so I had to convey this information to his family. And the first thing they did when they went into the apartment was to go for the jewelry box. And I went, what?
Yeah.
What?
Mm.
And I was shocked. And they're
Yeah.
like going, well, do you want anything? And I'm like going, yeah, I'd like the wedding band, please.
Mm.
I
Mm.
mean, but um, it's
It's yeah.
it's really bizarre. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I catch up
I
on
guess there
chat.
may be anger as well about, I don't know if you've had a difficult relationship with the person. Maybe there's anger that you've had at them that's not been resolved, or anger for
Yes.
things you wish you could have said or wish they had been different. But
Hmm.
it's all valid, isn't it?
It is, and I think that is that idea of complex grief, which is when when somebody dies and you have unresolved issues, or you have had a challenging relationship, and so
Mm.
there is no resolution. And I think that goes back to something that Jane said, which was, my dad told me he hated me right before he died. How do I deal with that? Is that something you are going to cover, or another day perhaps? Um, I just want to acknowledge it that, fuck. I
Mm.
mean, I would
Mm.
be really, really angry about
Mm.
that, because um, that is something that, how the hell am I supposed to deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's awful. So, um, and okay, I'm not going to apologize, but it was challenging,
Mm.
and because it did tell me, one of my takeaways from that, Joe, was my family is very different than other people's families.
Mm.
We may be angry, but we also, like you were sharing in the experience with visiting your friend in hospice, um, it was very open, it was very loving, and the family were there.
Mm.
So, wow. So, um, all right. So I want to go to the next one. The next stage that a lot of times people see is bargaining and yearning.
Mm.
What can you say about that?
Um, I think I mentioned, about having this fantasy that my dad had just kind of gone away for a bit and he would come back. And I still, sometimes that still pops into my head, that he's just, yeah, they've just had a really big row. They've not spoken for 29
Oh
years.
gosh.
And, I had this fantasy of it, like I'd be walking down the street and I would see him and I would just know it's him. And that, that's 29 years on, because I miss the fact that I never got to know him as a person. He was my dad, and that's how I knew him, but I never got to know the person he was. My mum's
Hmm.
told me bits, but I don't think she likes to talk about him too much, so I don't ask. But any
Hmm.
snippet of information she drops in, I just sort of hold on to it. Oh,
Yeah.
does it mean he was like this? But I do see the way she talks about him. I see a lot of myself, or a lot of him in me, very similar, I think,
Hmm.
personalities, which is nice, because then I think, well, he's with me then. In some way, I'm
Hmm.
carrying him. But yeah, I think there will always be that kind of yearning, if only he was still here. But then I don't know, because my life might look very different if he was still alive. I
Yeah.
don't know. So, but,
Yeah.
and I think I'm not ashamed of that. I think that's okay. I think if it was debilitating me and stopping me from getting on with my life, then that is, I think, a problem. But it's not. It's
Hmm.
just something that comes up.
Yeah. And I have to be very honest. I did see several therapists through the time of grieving, especially my parents and my first ex, because of weird things. And it's just like, I need somebody who can tell me what they are seeing that I may not see, and that my
Mm.
friends may not see. So,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
and so. Thank you, everyone, for when you're posting in chat that you're doing it respectfully. Thank you very much. I know there's a lot of things in there and I'm missing, so appreciate the support you're giving each other. One of the other steps is depression. This is that after, it's, we have denial, we have anger, we have bargaining, and then we have depression. Depression is one of those things, isn't it, Joe, that it can look different for so many different people. And like low-level depression, we may not recognize it until it builds up and shows up sideways.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, again, I don't know if it comes... Because years ago, I used to work for a bereavement charity, volunteer for a bereavement charity. It was some of my most favorite work. I know that sounds odd, but I really loved working with people who'd experienced a bereavement, and maybe that's because of my own personal experience. But I think sometimes people felt that to feel low, I shouldn't be feeling like this. Well, of course you should, when you think about what's happened. But I think for me, again, it's how far has it gone? How much is it impacting on your life? That's the question, I think. But to feel low in mood on a day-to-day basis because you've lost someone you really care about, or lost someone and it's brought up a lot of complex feelings, that's normal. I think we've sort of lost the ability to normalize what grief or even just having emotions is. We kind of demonize having emotions, I think, other than being happy.
Yes, you're right. And I'm just thinking back, you did a video recently on this.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned in a few videos about happiness, yeah.
And I think that's very important because it's the emotions that make us human. And there are lots more emotions than happiness. And and when we can pay really close attention and be completely in the moment with those emotions, that's when I think I am most alive. When I can let myself be sad and really, really cry because I feel safe, or really, really be joyful because I feel safe. Those are transformational times for me. Really transformational times.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just trying to depression, sorrows. Go ahead.
Sorry, Beth has said depression, sorrows, sinister sister. Sometimes you don't even know you're depressed. And I think maybe we all have different, for me, like from my experience of working with people, I guess, I think we all have our different signs that we've kind of gone over maybe the threshold of, I guess, what you say, sorrow into depression. I think, yeah, I think there's levels. From my experience of working with people, there's levels of low mood, but chronic kind of don't want to get out of bed, don't want to wash, don't want to eat, can't be bothered. That is, that's depression. When it's kind of, I suppose, that debilitating. And maybe there's the low level stuff where you're still functioning, but you're low mood. And that, I mean, I think it's just trying to normalize it and
yes.
people being able to access help if it has got to a stage where it's really kind of impacting on their life. But I think it can be very subtle, I think, when you move into that place that's maybe more serious.
Yes, and I would also support that with having people will let you be okay with having friends who are okay with you being depressed, and they figure out a way to support you in that. So I think part of the depression for me is I feel so alone and I feel so isolated, and nobody ever understands the depth of my grief. Well, no one will understand the depth of my grief. I will never understand your depth of your grief. I never want to, I don't want to try. I want it to be okay for you to experience that. If that makes, I think that makes sense. It's like, I want to hold space for you. You are where you are. And by gosh, if you want to sit there a little bit longer, well, let me get a pillow and a blanket and sit next to you. And let's go ahead and watch 6 seasons of something. But there comes a point with my friends who will look at, they'll look at me and it's like, okay, you stink. You need to go take a shower. I mean, that's the kind of friend I want.
Yeah.
So, Rhonda, I'm sorry. And Sherry said, wonderful people in the chat. I really needed this today. I live alone with no one to talk to. Thank you all. You're very welcome. And I'm glad you're here too. I have people around me who don't want to talk to me about my dad. Yeah. Wow. I'm sorry.
I mean, I don't know your circumstances, Rhonda, but I wonder whether, are you able to see a therapist? Your comment brought to mind someone I worked with years ago who had never talked about their experience because they'd been there when this person had passed, and it was very distressing, and they'd never talked about it. And so I said, well, do you want to talk about it here? And they did. And it was just, I think that really helped shift her, because somebody heard her, somebody, even though, I'm not connected to her, but somebody valued her time or valued her enough to listen to her story. And that can make a huge difference. I wasn't giving her any kind of, well, why don't you go and do this one? It was nothing like that. I was just giving her space. And I think, or, even if you're not able to see a therapist, if you can find somebody who will give you that space, a bit like Gerald said, who will sit with you with the blanket and just not try and get you to do anything in one direction or another, but just listen and be there. I think that's more powerful than we really take, we really appreciate.
Yeah. It's that I want to feel heard through all of this.
Yeah.
I'm not a problem to be solved. I just want to hear. So, then this idea of acceptance, which is oftentimes seen as the 5th phase or the 5th stage of grief. That being said, acceptance is acceptance for this is how things are. It doesn't mean you're done with it. It doesn't mean that you're all better. It means that you are figuring out a way to move through the world with this loss and through this grieving. And I don't know, anything you want to add to that, Joe?
Just something might sound weird. It probably wasn't until my late 20s. I used to dream about my dad, not a lot, but when I dream about him, it was like he was alive. So if it was a situation, I'd be talking to him, making him a cup of tea. It was like he was alive. And I remember always waking up and feeling that, oh, he's not here. And then when I started doing my counselor training, and there was a lot of personal development work on that training, I started having dreams where I knew he was dead. In the dream, I would see him, and I'm like, I know you're dead. And it almost felt as though my brain was finally processing and accepting that he'd gone, which is really, I don't know, it sounds bizarre, but maybe it took that long to kind of accept that's what it was now. I don't know. It's but yeah, you're right. Accepting doesn't mean the process is over, but it's an acceptance of where you're at now.
And I want to just let you know the power of you saying that is very emotional for me. It's like, okay, I mean, there's a lot of power in recognizing that maybe this is what's going on, that okay, my brain has accepted the fact that he's not going to come back in the way that I know. So thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's your, I'm doing this because now my eyes are tearing up. So and I'm just and Rhonda has said I did CPR on him when he died. My therapist just seems to blank to me, and that is even more challenging because you tried and then it didn't work in the way that you wanted. And I'm going to be bitchy for a moment. So you know, Rhonda, get a different therapist. Girl.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's like if you know, you have to do the work, and a therapist has to be able to follow you and encourage you to keep doing the work. But if your therapist is not showing up for you, then there's an issue. And by the way, you know, I'm going to do this for entertainment purposes only. Do not make decisions based on anything we say. Seek professional assistance, really. So, I mean, you're okay. But yeah.
You're well within your right. I mean, you wouldn't, if you had a, I don't know, if you had a crafts person come to your house and you weren't happy with the job they did, you wouldn't hire them again. You'd get somebody else. And yeah.
And I think, you know, Kristen Lewis says it's making room for the grief. And I think we do have to make room for the grief. We don't need to invite it to stay and to completely move in. We can invite it to stop around every once in a while and have a cup of tea and find out how it's going. And I actually think hearing when people have dreams of their loved ones, I like that. I think that's a very, very powerful, a powerful thing. Okay. There is also in those, you know, generally those 5 stages of grief, we oftentimes are trying to find meaning throughout those stages. And welcome to the challenge of trying to find meaning in one's life. I don't know what to say other than this is what we do, and that's well, why? And you know, I was just thinking about anger, and sometimes I don't display anger myself very well, and sometimes I really, really need to let that out because it's an emotional release, and if I don't, that emotion will show up in a different way that is not how I intended it. I mean, as a you know, as a teenager, there were times when this is when I learned not to be really angry. I put my fist through a wall, not healthy way to do that. And so it's like, okay, you have to let that stuff out so it doesn't show up that way. So okay. So supporting ourselves and supporting the grieving, 2 very, very important things. I'm going to go back to the chat, and this is where I have, I like to think of grieving and those stages as concentric circles. And we go in and out of those. And for someone who is, I also think that those closest to you are the ones who really should be focusing on helping me in my loss. And if I'm the 3rd circle out, how can I help someone? So you had talked about things not to say, and we had a few of those. What are some other things not to say to someone who is going through grief?
Well, I suppose someone's always said, like, get over it, that kind of thing. That's never or you should be over it by now. Or someone once said to me when my nan died, I mean, she lived to a great age, but still would prefer that she hadn't died. And someone said to me, well, it's for the best. No, it wasn't. And logically, it was. She wasn't well. But no, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. Just say nothing, or just say I'm sorry. I think I don't know if it's just the awkwardness around death. People want to say something, and I'm sure they're trying to be helpful, but it just kind of comes out wrong, and it's not. It often just really misses.
It has the adverse reaction than the person intended. Like, Jane, I am having a hard time believing somebody said this. He was a jerk anyway. Well, what the? I mean, he was my jerk, and wow, that's not helpful. Let me know if you need me to get Tarot Sachet onto some of these people, because she will do it. She is available. But yeah, bye, Kristen. Everything we experience in this life is a lesson. We have to recognize the lesson so we can move forward. What is this teaching me? Those lessons lead to blessings. They certainly can, Tammy, but don't ask me that when I'm in the midst, or when I am initially dealing with the grief, because I don't even know which way is up and down and left and right. But I think what you're saying is very important at the appropriate stage. But
Carol Lizzie's put one in chat. That's awful.
I would have supported you. I mean, because that's awful. That's awful.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is that thing, and you know, in the early stages of grief, when you're, you know, like you said, Joe, we oftentimes don't know what to say, and that's actually a good thing to say. I don't know what to say, because it lets somebody know that you're there, and you know, I'm sorry for your loss. I mean, I don't know what to say is telling them I feel for you, and you know, so yeah.
And I think it's such a simple thing to say, isn't it? I'm really sorry to hear that.
Yes.
I don't know if we. I'm making assumptions, but I don't know if people panic and think they need to say something that they think would be helpful, and they'll take the pain away, and it just then comes out a bit, misguided.
Yeah. I agree. You know, or they're better off now, not suffering. It was meant to be that. No, don't say that to me, because that doesn't help me. I understand that it's like, and it says more about the person who's saying that, and they probably haven't had to deal with grief. So I do think that people are trying to help. Yes, they often don't know how to say dumb, or even they don't want to say those things. But it's just it's like, and sometimes hi Amy, I just think sometimes just looking at someone and saying I'm sorry, and then a hug can speak volumes, and just like there. So one of the things that was suggested, and in my research, I was looking at this, and somebody who's in the early stages of grief and they're mourning, they can't think of what they need. And so instead of saying, what do you need? Perhaps a better option is, would you like me to do the dishes or prepare dinner? And then that way they only have to choose between two things. And if somebody says, you know, what do I need? Well, I need my mother not to have died. That's what I need. And so being able to, especially in the early stages of grief, saying, would you like this or would you like this? Would you
Yeah.
like me to sit with you or do you want to be by yourself?
Yeah.
Would you like to listen to some music or do you want it to be quiet? So,
yeah.
and so, and so, oh, Jane just said, I just said that. So, and you know, again, that I don't know what to say is a great thing to say because it opens the conversation. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we have to remember is that a lot of times in our culture, people swarm, and when somebody is actively passing, actively dying, lots of people show up to help. This is where hospice comes in. This is where relatives come in and they help. And they're there for the week before or the week or two after. It's the 2 or 3 months later when the person has had to live with that loss and that
Yeah.
change, where there is an opportunity to check in with people and not like, oh, I put you in my calendar, now I'm going to check on you. No, don't do that because then you're just, you know, an obligation that doesn't feel real. Instead, saying, you know, I'm thinking about you, and I wanted to I'm thinking about you
Yeah.
instead of how are you doing?
Mm.
Because Joe, I don't
Yeah.
know if somebody says how are you doing, how do you typically respond?
Well, I suppose it'd either be how do you think or I'm fine. You minimize it. You may not
Yes.
want to bother people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you say, isn't it? Maybe after the funeral or celebration of life or whatever people call it, people tend to drop off, and then it's kind of yeah, it feels like it's the person having to deal with it on their own.
And those are, I mean, you know, in this day and age, there's still, you can still mail notes. You can actually send something. What a nice thing to do. Just send them a little note to say, I'm thinking about you. Or, you know, or I had this great memory of of so and so, and I wanted to share it with you. You know, I think it's like really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So it's that thing. It's an ongoing process. There's no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. There's just your way to do it. So, you know, I mean, so again, wow, this has been a lot. Thank you. Supporting someone who is grieving is tricky. When to offer active support and when to give them space. It's also important to realize that a person in the midst of grief may not know what to ask for help. Yes, yes. Thank you, Patrice. And Nancy Paper Moon Tarot was interested in if there are connections between tarot and dealing with grief. Do you have any thoughts on that, Joe?
I don't know if there's any connections, but I get, you know, you could use tarot to help you. You might want to, I don't know where I saw this, but I mean, you might want to be careful about the questions you ask of tarot if you're going through grief, because yeah, you just might want to be careful about that. But maybe things like, you know, what would be helpful for me to do at the moment, and draw some cards on that rather than, I don't know, can't think of any examples, but I don't know, things like where is this person now? I don't know. That might not leave you in a good place. But I mean, yeah, I don't see why tarot couldn't support you.
And I think tarot and oracle cards can be very, very helpful if we also keep a realistic expectation of what they can do. They're not going to show up and do your dishes for you. But Yeah, damn it. For those who know me, I don't like doing dishes, but I can tell when I need to do self-care because my dishes pile up. It's an opportunity for me to be in the moment. But if you're talking about, I think, a way of support, I think there's great things to do. How can I support myself today? What's something that I need to hear today to help me? So keeping it because I worry about something about using tarot or oracle. It could disassociate, and hashtag for entertainment purposes only, but don't use that as a way to disassociate from how you're feeling. Use it as a way to help you understand what you're feeling. Journaling could be good with it too.
Yeah.
So, but anyhow, yeah, it's like, if they aren't helping with the dishes, then what good can they possibly be? Also vacuuming and detailing the car, and there are those times, like Marge said, when my friend's husband died, I said nothing. Our eyes met, and we hugged and we cried together. Yes. Yes.
You don't need to say anything, do you, sometimes?
Nope. Especially because you just get it.
Yeah. I remember at my nan's funeral, one of her carers came who'd been caring for her for, I think, quite a few years. And as soon as I saw her, I burst into tears, and she burst into tears. It's that shared connection, isn't it? You don't need to say anything.
Yeah. Geek Hillbilly showed up. Hi. Sacred Tears. I like that. It's that. Yeah, I remember when going to see. I have a group of friends that I knit with, and when my mother died, they showed up at the funeral home for the viewing unexpectedly, and it was just like, I was not expecting this, and it was so very moving. So very moving.
Yeah.
I love meditations that connect me with my loved ones. It brings a lot of comfort. Grounding is helpful. Go out and sit in the sunshine if you are being a hermit inside. I think there's a lot of wonderful things that can be done. So, Jo, this has been really an amazing time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know there were lots and lots of wonderful things said in the comments, and I've missed most of them, but I appreciate everybody giving me permission to have the conversation with you. Anything else you want to share about our topic today?
No, it's just people's reflections in chat just show, doesn't it? Like we said at the beginning, grief's very unique. We've all had very different experiences, and we may have a lot of similarities, but there's probably also things that are very unique to us. And I think that's the great part of being a human being. And I think it's about being respectful of everybody's different experiences. And yeah.
Jane has asked, please do this again. I don't know what next level would be for this, but I'll think about it. So everybody who's watching the playback, thank you for making it through this far.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an important topic that sometimes is difficult to talk about. Well, no, it's not sometimes. It is difficult to talk about. And it's important to talk about and to make the space be okay for everybody to have their own experience. Geek Hillbilly said, a longtime friend of mine lost her husband last year, and she still hasn't fully accepted it yet. I do what I can. I think that's wonderful. And Joe and I were talking a little bit backstage. I mean, grief is hard enough, but then in the last 2 years, when people were dying in a hospital and family were not able to be there, there was no ritual of the funeral and ways that we have closure. It's so, I mean, that's even more complex. So,
yeah.
So.
And there are different things. I know that when I worked in, when I volunteered at the bereavement charity, depending on where the person was with their grief, sometimes we would talk about memory boxes. And I've got a memory box for my nan and my granddad, actually, who'd passed away years before. But it's got letters in that I sent my nan when I was younger, cards I made her, like items of her jewelry, things that my dad and my granddad had. And it's a really lovely idea. I think you have to be in a right place to do it, but it's such a lovely thing that I can open up when I feel the need. I can just open it and look at the things in there, and it's lovely because it's just it's that connection. It's a nice connection to have. So memory boxes, I think, or you know, whatever you feel, or even something in your house somewhere where you dedicate that to the person. I think whatever works.
I call them my ancestor boxes for people who have died. I have boxes like a memory box. I have those, and in my spiritual practice about Halloween, I'm always bringing those out and putting them on my altar because our relatives and those who have loved us, who've passed, I believe they want to be remembered. And speaking their names out loud, for me, is a very healing and very powerful experience. So, thank you, Patrice. And Calla Lizzie said, everyone take a breather this afternoon. Take the rest of the day off. You know, call your boss. Say, Calla Lizzie said I need to not come into work. So this is important. We've all experienced sorrow and grief. It's good to share and connect. Yes. Thank you, Sherry. Gerald, Joe, you are wonderful. Everyone in chat are so kind. Have a great day. As I sit here crying, my heart is grateful. Thank you so much for today. You're very welcome. And that means a lot. You know, Junior dropped dead from a sudden massive heart attack. Lily is still acting a bit strange at times, very short-tempered, crying for no reason. Well, crying because in grief, and yeah. So 30 years of friendship, that's a hell of good support there, Geek. So, all right. So everyone, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for joining me, Joe. Everybody, show Joe some love. Contact information is below for her. And wish you great success with your new website, which is, I'll stop talking about that because it's like awesome. So, you know, and Calla Lizzie said, I'll write everyone a note. So, you know, for the boss. Yeah. Thank you, Jane. I am on later tonight with Tara Living with Manasa, and tomorrow morning with Jane the Seeker on her channel. And then tomorrow afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern, I'm joined by medium Betsy Palmer. We're doing another laugh and learn about mediumship and being a medium. So get to join in and learn some new things. So, but yeah. So everyone, thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
And bye.